Good morning, everyone. In the last session, we are trying to discuss about the Hibernate example. So we identify the different ways we can connect with the Hibernate to find out the how the Hibernate is going to work internally. Okay, so today we are going to discuss about the another important concept called how we can integrate Hibernate with our Spring here. Okay, so if I want to integrate Hibernate with the Spring, what are all the changes we need to provide here? Getting the point. So this is one of the important example we are trying to discuss in the today's session here. So observe carefully where we stop here. So I hope inside this particular com dot spring dot JDBC and JDBC annotations we discuss here. And today, so inside this particular Hibernate, uh, we'll try to start this particular example. So this is only the Hibernate related sections here. But anyway, let me create another package. Here we can continue. Okay, here we'll try to continue the same example here. Now, what I will do here, I'm going to create the one of the main class here. So something like a Spring Hibernate main we can create here, and this particular class will try to communicate the Hibernate from the Spring applications here. So this is coming from the default package com dot spring dot hibernate. So inside this only I'm going to use a package here. Okay, so this particular class we'll use to connect with a Hibernate related application. So to connect with, what we can do, we need to copy these sections here, and what we can do, so we'll try to create the same person related example here. So whatever the person we discuss here, we'll try to cover up the same person here. So now we'll identify it is expecting a JDBC template. Okay, so we'll not use this particular JDBC template. So what we will do, we'll go for the another important section called Hibernate template here, because the Hibernate template only it will communicate with the Hibernate from the Spring applications here. Okay, so this is important, we need to understand here. Now what we can do, so I will remove this particular JDBC template. Now here I'm going to write the Hibernate template here. So as of now, we don't have this particular Hibernate template. What we can do, we need to add the dependencies here. So what are the dependencies we can add here? We need to add the dependency call context JDBC. So we can go for the ORM. Okay, so ORM jar we added here. After this, Hibernate template. So what is the template we can use here? We can go for the Hibernate 3, and we can modify to Hibernate template here. And let me delete this. So we need to generate the setter method here. Okay, so this is the way of the writing the Hibernate template, and from this particular Hibernate template, we'll try to connect with the example here. So where is this example I'm getting is, so something like Hibernate template dot save here person. So we have all the methods. Why we are getting? Okay, save person, and here get all person. So how we can write this particular get all persons here? So something like here Hibernate template dot. So find we can write here. Okay. So what is the query we can write here? From person. Okay. So this particular from person, it will try to return the result here. So if we observe what is the type it is trying to return here, you can make this section person here. Now here what we can do, typecasting here, simply we can return, and person ID. So based on this, what we can do, Hibernate template dot. So what is the entity class we are having? Person dot class, and ID we can provide. Okay, so this particular ID internally it is trying to return the person object here. Now directly what we can do, so directly we can return this. So this is the person, and here update section. So how we can write this particular update section here? Hibernate template dot update method. So if I'm going to update this, it will try to update the record internally, and finally delete section. So to delete here, what we are passing here, we are passing ID, but we need to pass object here. Okay, we need to pass this particular object so that the object is going to delete internally. Hibernate template dot. So delete here it is expecting object here. Here it is expecting object. So now what we can do? We can write the query here. So what is the query we can write here? If I want to delete the query, so this is not suitable. The query we can modify the delete section later here. Okay, but observe carefully. So these are all the different objects we are having. We are trying to use this particular sections here. Okay, so this is important. Now what are the classes we created? We created here one person class we created here. Okay, so and we created person DAO and person DAO MPL. So we missed the person service also. Let me copy the person service from where we created. So this is the person service I am trying to reuse here. Here I'm going to use this particular person service. So person service internally it is using this particular person DAO, and this particular person DAO it will use these are all the methods here. Okay, so these are all the methods we are having here. Now we'll go for this particular Spring Hibernate main. And what is the XML file we are using here? The XML file we are using spring-jdbc.xml. But what is the file we can use here? We need to use the spring-hibernate.xml file. So let me create the file here. I'm trying to create this particular file here, something like spring-hibernate.xml. Okay, so this is the file we are going to use here, and we'll try to come up with this particular Spring Hibernate to main example, like main file it is. So now what I will do, whatever we created spring-jdbc XML, I will copy this. Okay, I will copy this all the sections here, and now I've placed into the under the spring-hibernate.xml here. Okay, so this is we are going to use it. Now what is the class we are going to use? So here, instead of this particular named parameter, we are going to use the Hibernate template. Get in the bus, because Hibernate template internally it will connect with the session. It will try to connect with the session, and from the session it is going to communicate with the database here. Okay, so this is important information we need to understand here. Now observe carefully. Now observe carefully how it is going to connect here. So I'm trying to remove this particular named parameter JDBC template here, because this is the previous example what we discussed here. Okay, now let me copy the Hibernate template here. So to copy this, we need to go to the person DOI MPL. So this is the person DOI MPL we need to go, and we need to copy this particular Hibernate template and come back to your spring-hibernate.xml file here. So we can copy this particular Hibernate template here, and now you can write here Hibernate template here. Okay, so this is the Hibernate template we are using. Now internally, so the same data source, whatever the data source we used it, we'll copy the same information here. Now the JDBC template we are not going to use it, so I will remove this, and here also whatever we are having, this section also I'm going to remove. And finally person DOO, and here what we can pass here, so we need to change the package name here. Okay, so we need to change this particular package name. So this is now com.spring.hibernate. Let me modify this com.hibernate.person.DOO.impl. It's correct only, right? So this is the correct class we created. Okay, so this is the way we can check the class, whatever you provided, it is correct or not. And the template. So now copy this particular Hibernate template here, and make the references here. And internally copy the package name and modify to this particular service. So person DOO. And here what we are using, so spring-jdbc.properties file we are using. The same, whatever the properties we are having, the same properties we can use. Otherwise, we can go for the Hibernate related sections here. Okay, so if I'm going to open this spring-jdbc.properties here, whatever we are using is, so this is. Okay, so these are all the properties. But if you are using these properties, you can use. Otherwise, what you can do, you can go for the Hibernate, whatever we used in the earlier example. These are all the Hibernate related example here. Okay, now we'll continue the same, whatever the Spring JDBC, the properties we used it. So I'm not modifying the database related sections here. Okay, so if I'm not modding the database related sections here, we'll keep as it is here. So this is the information we can use it. But now Hibernate template internally directly it will not connect with the data source here. Getting the point? It will not connect the data source. So what we need to identify here? We need to communicate with the session factory. How this particular session factory it is going to work internally. So this is important because Hibernate template. If I'm going to show you the Hibernate template, let me go to this Hibernate template. I'm opening it, and internally, so you can see session factory we are having, not the data source here. This is important. We need to understand. Hibernate template internally it is expecting session factory. Okay, the session factory internally it is expecting data source. Now, what is the file we need to configure here? So one more bean we need to create here. Bean ID session factory. Okay, so bean ID session factory, and here we need to provide the class here because session factory is a interface. So we need to identify the implementation class. So what is the implementation class? So we need to identify Control Shift T and local session factory bean. Get the So this is the bean we are going to use here. And package name. Package also is important here. So copy this Spring org Spring Framework orm.hibernate 3. Okay, so here you can specify the package here. Now, so we are trying to communicate with this particular session factory. So session factory internally how it is connecting here? How it is connecting? So property, whatever the property we are having, the same property we can add here. Property called data source, and we can make the references data source here. Okay, so this data source is going to connect internally. And what are the other properties we are having? Getting the point? So other properties, because Hibernate internally it is going to take the mapping file here. For the which class this particular the mapping file it is going to take, whatever the person class we are creating it, so it is going to take as a the person related mapping file here. Okay, so to add this particular mapping file here, we need to come up with one more property. So the property, what is the name we can provide here? So mapping resource. Okay, so mapping resource. Mapping resource internally, it is going to take list here. Okay, the mapping resource internally, it is going to take list of information here. Okay, so inside the list, now what I will do, I'm going to provide the value. So what is the property we can give here? So person.hbm.xml. Okay, person.hbm.xml. So this is the person related mapping file we need to create here. So let me create a file here. Okay, so we created this particular file. Now what I will do, I will copy whatever we used in the previous example. So I will try to paste it here. So we'll modify later the person related section here. We'll come back to here. Now the mapping resource I'm adding. So data source we are adding, and Hibernate is having some specific properties here. Getting the point? Here we are having database related connection properties, URL, username, password, username and password. But remaining properties we are having. If you go to this Hibernate.property file here, up to this, these are all the database configuration. Okay, and so here we need to provide the dilate and these three sections. So these three comes under the Hibernate specific properties here. Okay, so how we can add these sections here? Now again, we need to communicate with the one more property. So the name of the property is something like Hibernate properties. Hibernate properties. Okay, so inside this particular Hibernate properties, what we can do, we can provide the key and value. Getting the point? We can provide the key and value. So how we can provide this particular key and value? Now this is important. So here, first we need to use the props tag. We already discussed whenever we are discussing about the Spring Core, how this particular props tag is going to work, and internally we are going to use a prop and the key, what we can provide here, whatever we are using here. This is the key we can provide, something like Hibernate dilate here. And what is the value we can provide here? So this is the value we can provide here. Okay, so this is the value. Now another important section here, how many keys we are having here? So 3 keys here. So now you can see the show underscore SQL. I'm trying to copy this and I will paste it as a key. And the value I'm going to make as a true here. So another one, Hibernate HBM to DDL here. So this section of key we need to configure here. So prop key, and here what we can do, we can update here. Okay, so this is the way of configuring the Spring with Hibernate. So here what we are doing is we are connecting Hibernate template here. Hibernate template, it is not the constructor. It should be the property. So session factory, and we need to write the session factory. Okay, so Hibernate template internally, it is expecting the session factory, and the session factory internally, it is expecting the data source, and it is expecting the mapping resource as well as Hibernate properties. Okay, so this is the data source we provided, and person DAO, like a person service. So the property we are passing here, because we are trying to use the property file, so that I'm using. So we don't need this particular message resolver here, because we already discussed in this particular message resolver in our previous example here. Okay, so this is important example we are trying to discuss here. Now what we can do, we need to create this particular HBM file. So if I want to provide this particular HBM file, what is the table we can create here? Something like a person table, and what is the package we are having? com.spring.hibernate. So package is same. Okay, package is same here. What is the class we are going to create here? Something like a person, and let me see inside the person what is the information we are having. Let me modify to long here. So here long ID and here we can modify long. Okay, because we are trying to use the type as a long here. Okay, simply copy the first name and last name here. So property name, first name, the column, simply we can use the first name. Okay, type string. And another property, what is another property we can use it? Something like last name. Okay, so we'll remove this particular one-to-one association. We don't need this particular section of code. Okay, so this the component also we can remove here. We can This is the one of the important example we are discussing here. Let me format this. Okay, it is in the format mode. Okay, so finally we created mapping document also. Getting the pen. We created mapping document. Now what we can do is we need to save the object here. To save this particular object, what we need to go to the main file here. So where this particular main file is available, Spring Hibernate main here. Okay, we are going to use this example. We'll copy the same person service, and here I will comment out this, and I will enable this section of code. Okay, Spring Hibernate, and here the last name here Hibernate template. Hibernate template. Now what happened internally? So why I'm getting, so if I want to change this, now what we can do, long dot value of this value I can pass here because it is treating as a integer. Now save person, change the method save person to save person. So what is the, okay, from where it is expecting here? Okay, I think it is moving into the JDBC template class here. So this import we need to remove. Okay, so this because of the particular import here, it is moving into the like a JDBC package here. But finally, we remove the package information. Now you can see. So happily we are able to save here. Now I'm going to run this example. So if we miss anything, we'll get an exception here. We'll identify what is the exception we are going to get, and we'll try to fix the particular exceptions here. Now you can see error user ID. So user ID of relation person does not exist. Column user ID. First name, last name, user ID. So it is not the user ID. Let me go to the person. So here, person ID we can use here. So ID, person ID, and the type we are making as a long here. Now we'll try to run the same example one more time. We'll see how it is going to execute this. Why column person ID of relation does not exist? Okay, let's see whether we are having the person table or not first. So we need to go to the Spring JDBC because we are trying to save in the Spring JDBC only. Select star from. Okay, I think we have a person table. Yeah, we have a person table. Because of this, it is trying to throw an exception. So now you can see first name and last name it is created, but ID, while creating ID, we are getting an exception. Now what we can do, we can remove this particular table here. So directly, instead of dropping this, wait, we can modify the changes here.
I think if you give a just ID, it will take that instead of person ID.
Yeah, it will take that. Because if you say the structure, it is created wrongly because first name and last name it is already there. We are trying to create a first underscore name and a last underscore name. So we'll keep this table as it is here. Okay, anyway, we'll drop this. So no need this particular table. Okay, so we'll recreate this particular table. Now you can see insert into person, first name, last name, and person ID. Okay, because of this person ID, we got an exception, but now we are not getting any exception. So what is the advantage here? So you can see the table also it's created here. So we did not create this particular table. So just now we drop the table and finally it is created here. Now you can see it is trying to communicating the logger information also it is printing here. Okay, why it is printing the logger? Here we added the log4j.properties information here. Now finally what we can identify here. So if I'm going to select this particular statement here, this is the first record. Spring-Hibernate, Hibernate template here. Okay, here we provided the information. So whatever the information we provided here, the same information, it is stored under this particular person table. And what are the changes we need to understand here? So let me provide the changes first here. First, what we are doing is we are calling this particular person service. So inside the person service, which method we are calling? Save method we are calling. Okay, the save method. So how this particular save method, what is doing internally? It is calling this particular person DAO save method. And here, this is the interface here. And if I'm going to show you the implementation, so here we are calling this particular implementation section. So that is under this particular person DAO IMPL class, and it is implementing person DAO. Okay, because this example we already discussed here. So just I copy the all the classes into the com.spring.hibernate package, and we executed this. Okay, so finally now we are calling the hibernate template dot save. So this is the same method is inserting the record into this particular person table here. Okay, and the mapping information. So the mapping information is important here. Now if you observe this particular mapping here, what we are doing here, basically we are creating the Hibernate template. Hibernate template internally it is expecting the session factory, and we created the session factory here, and internally it is connecting the data source, and we have some mapping resource here, and the mapping information, whatever the HBM file we are having, we provided here, and so some of the Hibernate properties. Okay, so these are all the basic configuration. This is important when we are trying to communicate with the Hibernate here. So these are all the configuration we need to provide here. Any questions? Any questions regarding with this particular configurations?
So I have question. So this internally this Hibernate is calling the session factory. Can you show there where it is calling?
So we need to debug this particular example, local session factory bean, because this is the implementation class here. Here we are providing the session factory information here. So we are trying to load this particular class. So if you observe the simple example, here we are trying to providing the person DAO. So how this particular person DAO it is going to call? Same way, this particular local session factory bean object it is going to create it internally. So if I'm going to show you this, now you can see here, we have a different, the section of information here. These are all the like it is like some third local they are trying to creating with the help of the different generic here. And finally, so these are all the methods here, config time transaction manager. So this is something like what we are using here. We are using the mapping resource, and another one we are using Hibernate properties. So these are all the two sections we are using. So if we want to provide the additional information, these are all the different the configuration properties we are having. You can use anything and we can configure. But so Hibernate related sections, it is fine here, whatever we are configured here. Now, if you come back to here, so configuration classes, if you want to provide the additional classes sections, you can provide. So basically, this section code, it is going to take as a annotation example. We'll see how this annotation example it is going to work later. But as of now, the mapping example is what we are discussing, it is fine here. And internally, so these are all the Hibernate properties. Now you can see Hibernate properties is calling. Same, these are all the methods whatever we are discussing, all the properties related examples only. Whatever the properties are declared here, all the methods we are having here. So now you can see here we are having build a session factory. So when we are discussing about the configuration dot build a session factory, so this is the build a session factory is implemented here. So if I want to show you the code, Hibernate, here we are calling, so configuration dot build a session factory. Okay, basically the build a session factory, this is the build a session factory Hibernate related package basically. So if you see this org hibernate.cfg.configuration.build a session factory. But right now the local session factory being, it is we define under the Spring classes here. So the Spring classes, the build a session factory method is overridden here, and they provided the database information and some of the whatever the configuration we are having, we provided the configuration. So this data source is going to load from the configuration where we provided here. So this is the data source is going to load, and the same way it will load the Hibernate properties, and the same way it will try to load the mapping resource properties here. Okay, so is it clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, so along with this, we have a additional properties. If you're not interested in this particular mapping resource, we can go for the packages section. So here only we have another properties. If I'm going to provide, so where is the package section? Hibernate properties. Setter method. Okay, maybe it is in available another package. Let me see. Now you can see here we can provide the annotated packages here and the packages to scan. So what happens internally? Whenever you are providing this particular packages to scan, we can provide the wherever we are having the model classes, the package we can provide here. Okay, this particular package we can provide, and if I want to provide the any, so the annotated package, getting fine. Wherever we are going to use the specific annotation classes here, so those packages we can provide. Otherwise, all the classes are going to scan whenever we are going to provide the particular package. So otherwise, we can provide the particular classes section, annotation classes sections here. Because of this particular 3 sections here, it will try to configure the mapping information. Whatever the mapping information we are going to have, all the mapping information it is going to configure. So where we are going to provide this section here. So whatever I'm discussing here, mapping resource, in place of this particular mapping resource, we can provide packages to scan, and we can provide the annotation classes, or we can provide the annotation packages information. So these are all the additional 3 information we can provide, and inside the value, whatever the particular the mapping we are going to use, we can provide the specified value information. Okay, so in the 3, it is supposed to work on only this particular mapping resource. In the 4, we have some additional benefits we are having here. Okay, so the remaining configuration is same. If you are not interested in this particular XML configuration, what we can do, we can go for the annotation example. So this example, whatever we discussed, totally it is a XML based applications here. Now you can see person DO also we are creating in the XML only. Person service also we are trying to create in the XML. If I want to go for the annotation example, what we can do, all the annotations we need to provide the component and the service, whatever the repository we discuss here. Okay, so try with the annotation example with help of this particular reference, whatever the reference we are having. So JDBC annotation. So whatever the JDBC annotation we are having, So with help of this particular JDBC annotation, so you can execute the Hibernate annotation example here. Okay. So refer the previous the recorded session and practice with the Hibernate example here. But now what we can do here, so we'll try to move on to the another important section here. So along with this particular say, what is the additional example we can practice here? Something like loading an object here and deleting an object, because we already covered this example inside the Hibernate example. Okay, inside the Hibernate example, we already discussed this particular example here. Okay, we already discussed this particular remaining example. Let me go to here. So try with a Hibernate find here. So try with a get method to load the specific object here and update related section. Finally, you can add this particular delete section. Okay, so come up with the remaining method, how it is implementing it. The configuration is same, whatever the configuration we provided here. So using this particular same configuration, you can try to execute the simple example here. Okay, now what I'm doing here, I'm trying to providing, so one of the important example, another important example called transaction related example we are going to discuss here. So how this particular transaction it is going to work. So to understand this particular transaction here, basically what we can identify here, the transaction it is going to allow the group of operations here, like the several operations we can perform at a time here. This is very important here. Getting the point. If I'm trying to discuss any transaction, whether it is a Hibernate transaction or it is the Spring transaction, what happens internally? It will try to perform the group of operations at a time inside this particular single unit of work here. So this particular section we are going to call it as a transaction, and the group of transaction it is going to fail or success. So based on the fail or success, it is going to save the data into the databases here. Like the data is going to save permanently. Otherwise, permanently it is going to roll back the information. For example, now what we can identify here, what we can identify this particular transaction. So we are trying to perform the multiple operation. Like we are trying to, so one user we are having. Now what is doing internally? It is trying to communicate with one of the e-commerce application. What is doing it? So it's trying to trying to buy some item here. So inside this particular item, what is doing it? It will try to providing the bank related sections or credit card related sections here. But internally from the e-commerce application, now it is connecting to the bank related websites here. Okay, bank related application it is connecting, and here it is trying to providing the card related information, bank related information. What we can identify here, so it is one user is trying to connect with the e-commerce application. Here we need to maintain the session, and whenever we are coming back to this particular bank application, so here also we need to maintain the session, and here we need to provide the bank related information. Those information are valid information or not, we need to check it. If the information are valid, whether the user having the sufficient amount or not, we need to check it. So these are all the group of operations here. So this group of operations are any one of the operations fail, the entire whole transaction we need to fail here. Okay, so if I'm not failing, what happens internally? Getting the pen. So the user can get the benefit or the bank can get the benefit here. Getting the point. So here we are going to lose the important business information here. So this particular drawbacks we are going to have. Because of this, we are trying to discuss about the transaction. The transaction it is going to perform. These are all the information. If any one of the operation is failed, the whole transaction is going to roll back here. All the transactions are succeeded, then only the data is going to save permanently. Okay, so this is one of the important example we need to understand here. So same, if I'm going to show you the another important example. So one user we are having here, and here one bank application. Okay, so imagine, because India we have one of the famous application, something like SBI. Now what happens here? One user is trying to log in into this particular the banking application here. Now what happens here? So it's connected the net banking and it is trying to withdraw some amount here. Okay, imagine is trying to withdraw 100 rupees. Now, what happens internally? Whenever he's trying to withdraw the amount, first what we need is, we need to check here whether in his account the sufficient amount is available or not. First, we need to check here. Getting the point? If the amount is not available, if I'm trying to withdraw, what happens here? The problem here, the bank is going to lose here. Getting the point? Because in his account, he does not have the sufficient amount to withdraw here. Because of, even though if the amount is not available, we are trying to give the permission to release the amount here. Okay, so first the user is going to provide the username and password credential. So we are going to validate those information. So once the user credentials are validated, now we are moving into the like account related section. Inside the account related section, first what we need to provide, we need to check the information whether he is having valid information or not. So then only we can give the permission to withdraw the amount. Okay, so here if I'm not providing the transaction, what happens internally? So the bank is going to lose it. Okay, in our case here, bank is going to lose. So another important section. So one more person, what happened here? So here it is a one more bank account here. One more person is trying to log in here. Now what is doing here? Getting the point. So what is doing here? So it's trying to transfer the amount from current account to saving account. So this is the current account. Now what is doing is, from the current account, so it's trying to transfer the 200 rupees into the saving account here. So here also same problem. Getting the point? Here also same problem. But in his account, he's having the sufficient amount here. Getting the point? In his account here, he's having sufficient amount here. Okay, but what happens internally? The amount is deducted from the current account. The same amount, it is not saved into the saving account here. Getting the point? This is important here. The amount is debited from his current account here. So here, again, here bank is losing here, and here the bank is getting the advantage here. Like bank is getting benefit here. Getting the point? So this is important. We need to understand here. Here, the person is losing here. So because one person is trying to transfer some amount from current account to saving account. So inside the current account, the amount is debited, but inside the saving account here, the amount is not yet credited here. So this is one of the important example we need to understand. Okay, so this is another way the person is losing here, and some other cases bank is losing. So some other case here the person is losing. So here 50-50 chances we are having. So anyway, what happens internally? We are going to get the main the disadvantage, the business we are going to lose here. So because of this, the transaction come into the play, and the transaction, it is going to take care of the entire information, how it is going to work internally. If we have any exception, the entire transaction is going to roll back here, and all the transactions are succeeded, then only the data is going to save here. For example, the amount is transferred, like the amount is debited from this particular current account here. Now finally, the amount is not yet saved into this particular saving account. Now what happens internally? The transaction is going to roll back the whatever the amount we are trying to debit. So now what happens internally? The same amount, getting the point, from where we trying to debit the amount, it will try to credit into the same account here. Okay, it will try to credit into the same account here. So this is the benefit we can identify with help of this particular transaction. If all the transaction success, so the amount is going to save into the saving like a saving account here. Okay, so this is the way of providing this particular information here. And another important section here, if you observe, so if you are trying to book any ticket information, okay, so whether it is a flight ticket or train ticket, something, any ticket. So if you observe carefully, here we are having few tickets are available. Okay, here we are having few tickets are available, and we have a multiple users. So now you can see, so only 5 seats are available, but 10 users they are trying to book their seats here. Getting the point? Here 10 persons. Now what happens in that case here? Getting the point? This is important here. Now what happens internally? So 10 people, we cannot give the 5 seats here. What happens internally? Because 5 people cannot sit on the, 10 people cannot sit on the 5 seats. So we need to allow the only 5 user to book this particular 5 seats here. So how we can manage this particular section? So here also one more important information. Again, the transaction come into the picture whenever the 10 users they're trying to book this particular seat. Now, whenever they're trying to come back to the payment section. Okay, so once the payment is completed, then only we are going to give the seat allotment here. So otherwise, we are not going to provide any seat sections here. Now, observe what happens here. So if the 10 users, they are trying to connect it to this particular payment applications here. Now, what we will do, first we'll verify the user credentials here. So once the user credential we verified here, again, if the user credentials are valid, now what we will do, we'll provide the sufficient amount is there or not, and if the amount is sufficient amount is available, so how is going to provide the information. So credit card related sections or bank related, we are going to validate the credit card information. So then only we are going to provide this particular seat as a lock here. Once a seat is locked here, so another user cannot book this. So because here, if you observe any application, we are going to have some time here. So within this particular 2 minutes 36 seconds, we need to complete this particular transaction. If you are not yet complete this, what happens? The entire transaction is going to roll back to you. So this is the time frame we are going to have for each and every user. Within that time, if any one of the user is going to book this particular seat, we are going to provide the information here. Okay, so this is the way we are going to provide the seat based on the particular transactions or success here. Okay, so any one user is failed here, so the transaction is going to roll back here. The option it is going to given to the some other users here. Okay, so this is the one important information in the ticket booking applications. Also, the transaction is going to play important role here. Okay, now we'll see how this particular ticket is going to identify here. So if we observe carefully, we are having, so this is the simple diagram we can identify here. The one user, here we are having the user, it's trying to purchase this particular, is trying to purchase the ticket. So for first one, what we can identify, we need to verify the seat. Okay, VS is nothing but verify the seat. And what we can do, we need to reserve the seat here. And here, the third step, what we will do, we are going to provide the payment here. Okay, so receive the payment here. And then only we are having, so issue the ticket here. Okay, issue the ticket here. So these are all the 4 steps very important here. First, we are going to verify the seat here, and we are going to reserve the seat here, and we are going to make the payment, and later we'll try to release the ticket here. So if any one of the stage is failed, what happens internally? The ticket is going to roll back here. And if all the stages are success here, the entire transaction is going to success here. Like here, we are going to use a commit here. Here we are going to use the commit, and any one of the stages failure, we are going to use the rollback statement here. Okay, the transaction is going to roll back. So inside the rollback, we can write the code. So if the amount is debited here, we need to set back the same amount to the same account here. Getting the point? So this is the logic we are going to implement inside this particular rollback functionality. If the transactions are committed here, we are not going to so debit the amount here. Okay, so same this particular transaction is going to work in our bank applications also, or we can communicate with any e-commerce applications also. Getting the point? Nowadays, all the applications they are trying to make a payment online only. So when we are trying to make the payment online, we are going to communicate with the third-party applications here. Okay, third-party applications here. So the third-party application, whenever we are moving, so we need to manage 2 sessions here. So here in the main application, we need to manage the session, and same way, whenever we are trying to moving into the third-party application, so this particular session also we need to manage here. So inside the session, again, we are going to manage the particular transaction here. Getting the point? This is very important information we need to understand. Okay, so we'll identify how this particular transaction is going to work internally. So we see we have a different component here. Based on this particular different component, we are going to manage the transactions here. So what are the different component we are having? So any transaction, it is going to work on this particular, the 4 component AC ID. Getting the point? So this is important, AC ID. So what is the ACE transfer here? Basically atomic here. Getting the point? So this is atomic. And so what is the C here? So C something like consistent. Okay, consistent. And the third one, isolated. And the last one, what we can identify, so durable. Okay, so observe carefully. Now these are all the 4 component we are having here. So this particular, based on this particular 4 component, we are going to discuss about the important information here. Okay, so what exactly the atomic is going to work internally? So basically, first we'll discuss about this particular atomic here. And atomic, basically, whenever we are trying to perform multiple operations here, it will try to convert it into the single unit of work here. Getting the point? So whatever we discuss here, the verifying seat and reserving seat, and like making the payment and issuing the ticket. So these are all the operations here. If we'll try to convert it into the single unit of work here. If all the stages are success here, the transaction is success. If any one of the stages is fail here, the transaction is going to roll back here. Okay, so this is okay. This is the atomic. This particular component, it is going to work internally, and another one is consistent here. So this particular consistent here, what it will do internally. So once the transaction is end, getting the point? So once the transaction is, whether it is a failure or success, now what happen internally? So the system, it is going to provide the stage, like wherever the transaction is, like whenever we are trying to provide the whenever we are trying to communicate with the application, third-party application while making the payment, so some failure information or success information is happening here. It will not modify the stage of the particular transactions here. Getting the point? So wherever the transaction is in the state, the same it is not going to modify here. So for example, what happens internally inside this particular consistent here? Now, this is an application we are having here. We are trying to make the payment here. While making the payment, anything is happens here. Like the credit card will expire, the bank account related username password we may like the invalidate something. Otherwise, what happens internally? So we can make the payment success here. So whatever any one of the operation is followed here, so we are going to maintain the state here. Getting the point? So the state information, it is not going to modified here. So the state, whatever the state information, getting the point? The state information, it is going to handle by this particular consistent model here. This is important here. So how it is going to maintain here? Because if you are trying to provide the username and password, the username password is incorrect. What happens internally? It will keep the same state information and it will try to save the data into in the databases here. Okay, because the current transaction is failed because of username password invalid. And another information, whenever you are trying to provide the credit card information, so if you are not following the card number properly, so we may get an exception. So in that case, so that is the credit card sections we are going to copy the same state information in the database. Okay, and if all the values are success, we are going to save the success state information in the database. So this is the consistent. It is going to handle the state information, the transaction state information here. Okay, this is important because transaction it is going to follow the different status, one application to another application. Whatever I defined like provided information, like in the e-commerce application, so we are going to book the item and we are going to make the payment and we are going to communicate with our bank account, and there we are going to release the amount, and once amount is released, we'll come back to the main application and we are going to so book the last item call, something like check out something. Okay, so these are all the different status we are going to have in our e-commerce application. So the state information it is going to maintain by this particular consistent component here. Okay, same way isolated. So this particular isolated is important here because on the same data, whatever the data we are having, the same data it is going to applicable by the multiple users here. For example, the same whatever we discuss here, like ticket applications here, the online booking applications here, because here we are going to have one seat here. So this particular seat is going to booked by the multiple users here. So this particular multiple user, it is going to provided by this particular isolated here. It is going to give the permission to the multiple users. They are going to work on the same data, but whenever they are trying to work on the same data, it will manage each and every user information here. Getting the isolated component here, it is going to maintain the each and every user information internally. Okay, so this is the isolated component. And finally, durable. So what exactly this particular durable will do? Once the transaction is completed, the transaction information should be made permanently. Whether the transaction is success or failure, the data is going to save permanently. So it is nothing but the data is going to save in the database here. So if it is a success, we are going to provide the success information. If it is a failure, we are going to store the failure information. So this is also important here, why the transaction is failed here. Because of any application reason or any user having some invalid information here. Okay, so these are all the four components we are having it. So any questions regarding this particular four components?
So which one handle the cancel if we want to cancel the ticket?
See, cancel I will explain. Right now, this is the four the component it is going to manage, because each and every component will take care of the information. But to handle the cancel information, we'll show you with programmatic or like annotation example. But the transaction is going to work on this particular 4 component. So we'll see an example how it is going to cancel. See, the transaction is not going to cancel. It is going to like a rollback, and the rollback basically when we are getting an exception, then only the transaction is going to roll back and we'll save the data here. So I will show you how the transaction is going to roll back and all those information. But so these are all the main component information. So like in the Hibernate, how we are using tx.commit, and the same way we are having the same tx.rollback also. Whenever we are following this particular rollback here, it will try to remove the, like basically whenever we are going to click on this particular commit only, the data is going to save into the database. So otherwise the data, it will not save permanently here. Same way, when the exception is coming, we are going to call this particular rollback. When we are calling the rollback here, all the operations, whatever the operations we are providing, the operations is not going to save here. So basically, saving and rollback is nothing but here we need to understand the information. Because if you see, we have a bank application. Okay, we have a bank application. So as a user, I log into the bank here. Now I'm having some amount here. Whenever we are logging, we are going to check the like credential information. Okay, initially we'll check that. After that, whenever you're trying to transfer some amount here. So for example, the same amount, if I'm trying to transfer this particular 200 amount. Now first what we will do, we'll write the code to validate whether this particular user having a sufficient amount or not. First we'll load the total amount from this particular his account here, and whatever the amount is trying to transfer, whether this amount is available or not. If the amount is less than to the total amount or not, if it is there, we'll try to release an option. And this amount, whatever amount we are trying to release here, again what happens internally, we are trying to connect him with another account here. Okay, so this is the current account. Okay, and this is the saving account. Now what happens internally, we are going to provide the same the bank details, IFC code, something like. Okay, once we provided this, now again what happens internally, we are going to validate the account number, IFC code, so username, something. Okay, if the all the credentials are validated, then only we are going to call tx.commit. Okay, tx.commit. So when we are going to commit this particular tx.commit, whatever the amount we debited from this particular amount, this amount is going to committed in the proper table, and the same way the same amount is going to credited into the saving account here. So in meantime, in the two application, any one of the failure because of this particular username, account number, IFC code, or over the network, if the internet is not available, something like IFC code is wrong, any one of the information, what happens here, basically, we'll get an exception. We'll get an exception. Whenever we are getting any exception, we are going to call inside the exception rollback. Okay, simply we are going to call this particular rollback here. Once the transaction is rolled back here, so this particular data is not going to committed here. Once the data is not going to save in the database, again, so whatever the total amount, for example, total amount is 400. Okay, is trying to debit 200, and the 200 we are trying to set into the saving account. Whenever we are trying to roll back here, the amount will be 400. The amount will be 400, not 200. This is important here. Whenever we are committing this section, now what happened here? The total amount will be 200, because we are doing the subtraction from the total amount. We are going to do the some subtraction here, because we are trying to debit some amount into the another account here. So everything is going to take care of these two sections: transaction.commit or transaction.rollback here. But this particular transaction is important here. How we are going to write the transaction, like each and every request we need a transaction, or all the requests we are going to manage only one transaction, that we need to understand here. But canceling the transaction and everything is going to take care of this particular transaction dot rollback here. So is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so coming back to here, now what are the different transaction manager we are having? Because we identify the component like ACID. So how the transaction manager it is going to manage, and what are all the Spring provided transaction manager. So as I explained here, Hibernate is also contain the Hibernate transaction manager, and so JDBC will contain the JDBC related transaction manager, and so we'll identify with different technology we are having different transaction manager. So if we want to communicate with the JDBC, so we have the transaction manager called so data source transaction manager. So this particular transaction manager we are going to use to communicate the database related application, sorry, JDBC related application. Okay, so this is the transaction we need to enable here, because we are discussing about the Hibernate here. Now we have a Hibernate transaction manager. Now you can see we are having Hibernate transaction manager. It is having so Hibernate 3, Hibernate 4, and Hibernate 5. So these are all the different versions we are having this particular transaction manager. Okay, now if I'm going to open this particular transaction manager internally, now you can see session factory as well as data source is expecting. Okay, these are all the important information we need to understand. These are all the so remaining like Boolean properties here. Now you can see so transaction manager internally it is expecting the session factory. Now how we can create this particular transaction manager with help of this particular bean ID and the property we can go for the session factory. Okay, so once the session factory is completed, directly we can set into the data source, because session factory internally it is containing this particular data source here. Okay, after this, now what we can identify here. So after property set, we don't need to discuss. This is important. This particular do get transaction. So this particular do get transaction, it is going to provide the much information here. Okay, now if you see, observe try and catch block. Try and catch block we are using. So why we are using this particular try and catch block here? Because we are going to so allow the transaction within this particular try and catch block. If anything will fail, so it will come to the particular catch block, and inside the catch block we are going to provide the rollback functionality here. Okay, but any one of the method it is going to call this particular doing transaction, and we are creating the transaction here only. The transaction is going to create it here, but as a application level, how we can provide the transaction, that section we need to identify here. Okay, we'll see that, but we identify Hibernate transaction manager. It is going to use to communicate the Spring into Hibernate related transactions here. So once this particular transaction is identified, now how we can write this? Let me go back to here. In our example, where is the file? Okay, not this here. So here, what we can write here? Bean ID, something like a transaction manager, and we can provide the class. So we'll try to discuss about the class as a Hibernate 3 package related class. And packages we need to add here. This is the package. Okay, and internally what we can provide here? So we are having session factory. So I'm copying this particular session factory here, and I will paste it here. So this is the way of creating an object of this particular Hibernate transaction manager. Okay, so once we provided this particular Hibernate transaction manager, so it is going to provide the responsibility of our transaction management inside the org Hibernate transaction object here. Okay, whatever the transaction we discussed in the previous example, if you see Hibernate main, here we are discussing begin transaction. The transaction is coming from the where. If I'm going to import this here, org Hibernate dot transactions here. Okay, whatever the Hibernate transaction manager we are discussing here, it will try to work on this particular Hibernate transaction, because if you see Hibernate transaction is a interface here. Hibernate transaction is a interface here. And internally, so begin and commit and roll back here. Getting the point. So these are all the Boolean properties we are having. So was committed, was rolled back. The transaction is in active status or it is completed in the status. So now you can see timeout here. So in the real-time application, we are able to see the timeout here. So here we are going to provide how many milliseconds we want to show the time the transaction should be available. Getting the point. So these are all the properties, but properties are available, like methods are available inside the transactions here. If I'm going to show you this transaction, because this transaction is a class here. So this is the class here. Now it is implementing from the way resource transaction manager, and it is expecting platform transaction manager. This is basically Spring related transaction. Okay, Spring related transaction. Now you can see we are trying to call the get a transaction to get the transactions information, and commit we are having, and we are having a rollback. Getting the point. The same information, but now you can see here we are having transaction status here. So now you can see here we are having the interface. We have some other methods here. So set rollback only, is rollback here. So we are having flush and is complete. Is completed. These are all the specific method, but all the methods are implemented inside the org Spring Framework transaction. Now what we can identify here, whenever we are calling this internally, it is going to call this particular the interface call platform transaction manager. We are going to provide all the information here. Okay, now you can see. So this is only one method we are having, get to resource factory. We'll come back to your transaction, this one. Now if you go to this particular Hibernate transaction manager and how this particular methods are implemented, this is an exception. Here we'll see commit here. Here we are having commit method. So whenever we are calling the particular commit method, this particular code is going to execute here. Now here, what we are doing is we are going to checking the status information, the transaction status here. Based on this particular status, we are again checking his rollback status. If it is available, we are going to roll back here. Otherwise, we are going to commit this particular check. Okay, here finally you can see process commit. But if you see here, we are trying to roll back the transaction, and here also we are trying to roll back the transaction. Okay, only one case we are trying to commit the transaction, but internally simply we are going to call this particular commit method. Getting the point. If we want to write explicitly, so this particular code we need to write here. All the condition we need to handle explicitly. But if you give this option to the Spring here, so directly we can call this particular commit and we can pass the transaction status here. Okay, we can pass this particular transaction status. It will take care of the commit and rollback information. But whenever you are trying to provide explicitly here, what we can do, we need to go to this particular platform here. Getting the point. We need to override this particular commit method as well as rollback method. Getting the point. We can write one class like so custom transaction manager, and we can implement this particular platform transaction manager, and we can write we can implement these particular three methods, and we can override whatever the custom logic we are expecting here. Okay, otherwise we can go for this particular Hibernate transaction manager. Okay, so this is the particular class we are having, and we identify how this particular commit and rollback is implemented internally. Now what we can identify here. So if you are not interested with the help of this, what we can do, we can go for the explicitly here. Okay, but internally we are not going to follow anything. Simply we'll try to use this particular the class. The class is going to take care of the particular class. Whenever we are creating object of this particular Hibernate transaction manager internally, so Spring will take care of the transaction commit and rollback here. We don't need to worry about this, because internally what we are doing is whenever we are calling this particular %dy Hibernate template internally, it is going to open the new transactions here. The new transaction is going to take care of commit and rollback. Okay, this is the default implementation is going to provided by the Spring here. But if you want to provide the explicit transactions here. Now what we can do here, we need to write the one more template here. One more template. So what is a one more template we need to provide here? Something like a transaction template. Okay. So this particular transaction template we need to use here. So using this particular transaction template, we need to provide the explicitly the commit and do rollback sections here. Okay. So how we can write here? So here, if I'm going to save this, here I'm going to provide the execute method. So this particular execute method, we are going to pass something like a status. Internally, if you say this particular execute here, what is expecting? Transaction callback here. Getting the point? Is expecting transaction callback. So basically, transaction callback is a one interface here. One interface. So how we can write this? Now you can see new transaction callback. So new transaction callback. Basically, I'm trying to create a object of this particular interface here. Which interface here? Transaction callback. Now I'm trying to create object of this, and finally we override the unimplemented method call. So do in transaction. Okay. So where we identify this particular do in transaction, if we go to this particular do in transaction, where is in transaction? Okay, I think so. This is not the method is not available here. But anyway, the transaction callback is having this particular the method call doing transaction here, and finally, what is the type we can provide? Okay, so what is the particular type we are trying to provide here? So if you are not interested to return anything, we can make something like a void here. This is the generic type we can provide void, and here also we can provide the void here. Okay, and whatever we are calling this, we can call inside this particular doing transaction. Inside this particular doing transaction, now what I will do? So I am going to create a try block. So inside the try block, I am going to save and catch block. So inside the catch block, we can handle with exception. We can handle with exception here. So this is important. And here, what we can do? So directly you can pass this particular status here. Status dot set rollback only. So this is the method we can call here. Okay, this is the programmatic transactions here. Getting the point? This is important. We need to understand it. Programmatically, we are handling this particular transactions here. Now you can write the return statement. We are trying to return something. Now, if I want to handle this particular example, what we can do? We need to enable this particular transaction template also. We need to enable this particular transaction template. So here on the each and every transaction, we need to write the transaction template, and we can call the execute method, and we can, whenever you are calling the execute method, new transaction is going to start here. Getting the point? New transaction is going to start. So this transaction in the real time, how we are going to implement here? For example, checkout method. Okay, user when is trying to click on this particular checkout, or when the user is trying to click on any payment. Getting the point? Any payment. So whenever he is trying to click on the payment, same thing. So internally we are going to define the payment method. Okay, so inside the payment method, we are going to start with the transaction template, something like a TT, and we can call the execute method. Okay, we can call the execute method, and we can write the logic. So we can write the commit logic as well as rollback logic here. Okay, so this is the way we can programmatically we are handling this particular transactions here. So otherwise, if you are not interested in this particular template, what is the information we can identify? Whatever I provided, platform transaction manager one interface is there. We can provide the the platform transaction manager, and we can override the commit and rollback methods. And so using that, we can provide the transactions also. Okay, so instead of providing the platform, it is a simple one, the transaction template, because template is provided, the common logic is already provided by the Spring, and whatever the business logic we are expecting, the business logic only we can write with help of this particular execute method. Okay, so this is the some advantage we are going to get when we are trying to discuss about the transaction template here. Getting the point? So this is important. Now what we can do, so whatever this particular default transaction manager we are having, so we'll try to keep that one, as well as we'll try to create the transaction template here. So the transaction template, if I want to create, I want to copy this, and we'll go to this particular Spring Hibernate. What happened this? And here bean ID, so something like a transaction template, and class we need to provide here. Once we provide this particular class, now what is expecting internally? This is important here. What is expecting here? So internally it is expecting here the property. The property name we can provide the transaction manager. Okay, transaction manager. Now I'm trying to create this. Okay, finally, now here, whatever we provided here, the same transaction template, and enable the setter transaction template only setter here. Okay, set transaction template here. Now finally, the same method, whatever we are using, so execute method I'm calling here. If anything failure here, we'll try to throw an exception. Getting the point? So this is important here. So inside the catch try block, we are trying to save. If any exception we are going to get, this particular exception is going to handle, and it will so set the rollback, and after this it is going to throw an exception here. Okay, now we'll go to the main example. So with help of 16, we can run the same example. So null pointer exception we are getting something. So transaction template, I hope it is not yet created. Because of that, we are getting an exception, I guess. The transaction template, whatever we created, it is not created object of this particular transaction template here. So why it is not created? Anything we are missing here? Sorry. Transaction template, here we cannot create. We'll go for the okay, so we'll keep as it is here, but finally I want to remove this from here. We'll go to the transaction like a person service, and here I want to provide so setters and getters, and here we can write transaction template dot execute new transaction callback. If I'm not writing this, the anonymous call like hold code, now what we can do, directly we can write the status. So we can define this particular sections here. Okay, here we can write the try block. So whatever the inside the try block, we can call this particular method, and catch block exception EX here, and status dot set rollback here, and throw EX. So what is the exception we are getting here? Method execute transaction type is not applicable for node type here. So he's expecting to write the type here. What is the type we can provide? Sorry, the code we define in the wrong place we define here. Here we need to define the particular code. Transaction template dot execute. So we'll see this what happens. No type is expecting. It should be the okay. So anyway, the like a lambda section we'll discuss later. Type is expecting here. Now unimplement the method. Catch here. So I'm trying to throw an exception, and we'll call this method inside the try block. Okay, now what we can do, whatever we define inside this particular Hibernate transaction template and person survey, it should have one more property here. One more property, something like a transaction template. Okay, the transaction is going to start from in the service classes. Now again, I'm trying to run the same example. Now you can see, so happily one more record be inserted with help of this particular. So ID call 4. The value we did not modify here, the same Hibernate like a Spring Hibernate template here. Getting the point. But what we need to focus here, explicitly we are calling the particular service section, like the transaction. Using this, we are trying to explicitly we are enabling this particular transaction here. Okay, this is the way of writing it. This particular code now what we will do, we'll try to write wherever we want to enable the transaction. Getting the point. So as I explained here, all the bank application like the transfer related methods, the checkout related method, payment related method, getting the point. For all this particular method, we are going to write this particular transactions here. Okay, so this is the status we are going to provide here. Whenever we are providing this particular rollback, if we get any exception, now what happens internally, it is going to roll back the changes. Because here if you see inside this particular what we can identify, the commit method. The commit method here we are checking the is local rollback, or you can see here we are having the global rollback here. Because of this particular all the rollbacks here, it is trying to call the rollback status here. Getting the point. This is the way of identifying the rollback here. Because here what we are passing here, transaction status here. So the transaction status, now what we are doing here we are trying to modifying the transaction status here. Because of this, the transaction status is going to modify whenever we are going to get any exceptions here. Okay, so this is the way of writing this particular programmatic transactions here, but we'll identify the annotation related example later, how it is going to work internally. So to understand this particular annotation related example, so we need to understand some more component. Those are components are available for this particular annotations here. Okay, so we'll continue tomorrow this particular annotation example here. So once this particular annotation example is completed, now we'll move on to the MVC related example here. Okay, so try to practice the Hibernate with a different example here, because we use only save example. So try to come up with a loading object and deleting object, the CUD operations example here. The configuration, whatever the configuration we are using, the same with the same configurations, we can implement the remaining examples here. Okay, so any questions regarding about today's session? Okay, so if we don't have anything here, so tomorrow we'll continue the continuation of this particular transactions here.